Welcome back to Cove Street Boatworks. We're just going to take a quick look at the Sunfish and the progress we've made. I ended up taking off the splashboard and the mast step, or the reinforcement around the mast step, because they weren't really bonded to the hull very well whatsoever. I had mistakenly thought I had taken them off and you know, Sikaflexed them back onto the hull, but I hadn't. I had just done around the seam. So the mast block was loose, so I pulled it off and I pulled the coaming off. That way I could get everything stripped off here. I looked at taking the aluminum strip off on the cockpit, but to be honest with you, there's no nails that, you know, usually you would see in this kind of thing. So I think it's just pushed on, and I was just like Pandora's box. I really didn't want to open that up. It's on there stiff enough. I tried to crimp it a little bit more, but I'm going to leave it in place. I took the hardware off. He had taken some epoxy and filled in these failed holes from before. I chipped out a little bit of that so I can famo wood over this to make it a little more less obtrusive. I have already coated a lot of the hull where the worst checks were. Using a low viscosity epoxy, one of the things that you'll see is that even with a low viscosity epoxy, you're not going to get a lot of fill in the larger checks. Even if you're trying to push it in and drive it into those open checks, many times you're not going to get that capillary action. It's not going to fill or even get drawn up into those tight crevices, those tight cracks that we have. So we're going to have to go back over this after we do this sort of prophylactically, and then we'll push some fairing, some epoxy-based quick fair or some kind of fairing compound into those areas, make sure they're filled. So again, I've gotten over the worst of it. I'm going to give this a really brief sanding, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to saturate the entire deck one more time, and that'll be it. We'll be able to quick fair it, fill in any irregularities, grind that down, and we'll be back to priming. So when we sand this hull down, and I use these kinds of tools throughout the shop, we use air tools. This is a Hutchins Hustler. It is a pneumatic speed sander, or people call them longboard sanders or air files. I'm not a body shop guy, although I was trained how to use these things by one. But these things work great. Air compressors are invaluable tools when it comes to finish work, whether it's sanding or spraying finish in a shop. The only trick is to make sure you get one that's large enough. It should be at least 5 to 7 horsepower. It has to be a 2-stage compressor, and the reservoir tank on it should be, you know, at least 60 to 80 gallons, because these things consume a large volume of air very, very quickly, and you don't want the compressor running all the time. So these are, I'm just using sticky backed longboard paper. The one here on my right is 36 grit. The one on my left is 80 grit. I used 36 grit when I was cleaning this hull up initially. They're not as aggressive as you might think, not on wood, but they do a really good job, and they keep the scratches all in one direction. We're using 80 grit right now. We'll see how quickly it fills. 80 grit's not nearly as coarse as you might think, and these papers are expensive, so we want to make sure we're getting the most out of it. So I don't know how this is going to work audio-wise, but now this epoxy, you can hear the air compressor in the background. This epoxy is, I don't know, maybe a week old, so it's had plenty of time to cure. And I'm going right over the top of it, and with 80 grit paper, which again is pretty mild. And you can see here, hold on 1 minute. Shouldn't be doing this because I'm blowing dust all over the camera and stuff, but you can see it's cutting off quite a bit of the nub that was on there because we raised the grain quite a bit. These sanders can go, you know, with the grain, as I've been just showing you, and you can sort of float them across the hull, or they can go diagonal if you want to cut a little more aggressively. Again, we're going to paint this hull, so we don't really care that there are scratches on here as long as they're somewhat uniform in depth. You certainly aren't going to want any 36 grit scratches because it's going to show even through paint for quite a while. You're going to have to fill those before they disappear. 80 grit, however, is a good grit to remain. so that we have enough tooth for the paint to adhere to the material, to the wood. So we're going to continue with this. I'm putting just the tiniest bit of downward pressure on here, but not much. You don't want to drag the tool, you want to let the tool do the work. So I'm just trying to keep it in relative control as I move it across the hull. And just like I said, just the tiniest little bit of pressure, but not much. You're pretty much letting the weight of the tool and the sandpaper do the work. And you can take a look here. We can see that it is filling a little bit here, but usually I have a brush here, but you can just slap it off. You can see that a lot of it cleans itself off pretty well. So if this epoxy was green in any way, it would fill this paper up almost immediately and it would be useless. So that's one reason you want to wait till the stuff sets up. And again, if this was green, you would certainly want to have some kind of arm protection here, because green epoxy, sanding like this is one of the primary ways that you can get an allergic reaction. This is not green, so I'm not too worried about it. Plus, I use System 3 formulations, and System 3 formulations seem to have a little less of a tendency to have allergies than like West System, which definitely seems to be more predominantly the epoxy that will produce allergies in people. There's also a speed control on most of these longboard sanders, and right here there's a knob here that you can turn. So that's pretty much maxed out on this particular sander. They do have to be rebuilt periodically. The seals in here, you have to apply oil to them. This is the first time I've used this pretty much all winter, so I may want to put a few more drops of oil on here and try to get those seals to seal up. I've had this sander for, oh, I don't know, maybe 5 years, maybe a little more than that. So if you get a good one, they last a long time. So the Hutchins longboard sander here that I showed you, I use this more for finish work, for sanding, varnish and sanding paint. It's a little more, it has a little more finesse. It's a little higher quality and movement, but it's not always the best thing when you're doing aggressive sanding. So this is a Blue Point sander. From Snap-on. I got a lot of Snap-on stuff in the shop here. These things are probably, I got 3 or 4 of these. These are probably 15 years old, and they're rebuildable, as most of Snap-on stuff is, even the Blue Point stuff, which is their cheaper line. But these are much more aggressive, and they're more what you'll use for higher grit paper. This is 36 grit paper. I'm not going to put it down in this hole right now, but you can see that it's a higher speed. There's no speed control on here. It's just set it and go. But these things are what I use for most of the rough sanding. This is what I used for doing the initial pass on this deck. And with heavier grits, they do a phenomenal job. So again, these aren't terribly expensive. I haven't bought one in a long time, so I can't tell you what the current price is. But if you're going to buy one, get a good one. Get one that's rebuildable. These are both good examples of longboards that you can have rebuilt and will last you a long time. And believe me, compared to doing this manually, with a piece of plywood with 2 handles on it, these things are worth every bit of money that you pay for them. I've just about gotten through the entire top here with 80 grit. I used a single piece of paper. I left it on the Hutchins, and you can see here that it is starting to fill a little bit. Get it in focus here. It's starting to fill a little bit in the sandpaper, but I did this entire deck with 1 piece of paper. So, I mean, there's a lot of savings here. It probably took me 20 minutes, maybe even a little bit less. So a great labor-saving device, these air files are. And if you have a proper sized compressor, again, you know, 70, 80 gallons, two-stage compressor head, absolutely, 5 to 7 horsepower, then you get to use some of these kinds of tools. And this is a snap-on mutter. It's an 8-inch random orbit. This thing is brutal. I'll use 36 and 24 grit paper on here to really rip into things, like if I'm taking off polyester on a hull or something, or taking paint off where it's too heavy to use a paint stripper. This thing is amazing. Just a pure brute. And then a standard 6-inch, you know, random orbit. These things work phenomenally. I've probably been through, these are not very expensive. This is just, well, this is a Blue Point. So I've been through many of these. This is what I do a lot of the rough work with just 6-inch Velcro. Great sanders. And then this is a little Hutchins speed sander, but a lot of people, I think it's known technically as a water bug. And what's so cool about this is it has a little hose and a little filter on it. And when you put this in a bucket of water, it draws water up so that you can do wet sanding. And I use this all the time on finishing varnish before I'm ready to buff it out, or in between coats of varnish. This thing is incredible, and it eliminates all that tedium of doing wet sanding by hand. This is a phenomenal little sander. You can adjust the volume of the water coming into it. You can adjust the speed on it underneath. Trying to show you a little bit more. Little lever here to adjust the speed. These things are incredible. So this, along with impact drivers and die grinders, I mean, these are just a couple of the things that you use a compressed air supply for. And these are far, far superior to the electric equivalents. So here's one more tool that I couldn't live without that's an air tool. This is a Blue Point air chisel. You'll notice a lot of body shops or mechanics use these with a chisel bit in them to drive off mufflers and exhaust pipes. They split them. These just, you know, have in and out motion. They're adjustable with the force that they use. But we have taken, or I took the bits and I cut one off and I used a ball burr to give myself a little concavity here, and this is how I set rivets. We do a lot of pre-World War II launches. A lot of them are copper riveted over a copper rove, a copper washer, and I set them initially by hand, but this is how I drive them tight. And this gives a very, very uniform finish on that rivet that you're peening over. And it's quick, so we can frame out a 24-foot Fay and Bowen in just a couple days from start to finish. That's bending everything in and everything. If I have 2 people working on it that know what they're doing, so you can't replace this tool with anything that's, you know, plug-in. There's just nothing out there like it. I'll show you what this sounds like. Takes a little getting used to, and definitely some earphones. You'd be surprised. This I've used on peening over 3/4-inch bronze rod on the inside, where we're driving pins through the keel and driving it up through a floor frame, a sawn floor timber. I'll peen it over with this, and this does a phenomenal job. It's much, much better than doing it by hand. All right, let's close this episode up. If you're going to look at using air tools, in particular longboard air files like this, one thing you're going to want to consider is that you really should wear gloves, padded gloves in particular, if you're going to run these for any prolonged period of time. This can give some people circulatory issues in their hands and can make your hands go sort of numb and tingly. Padded gloves will help. Also, just taking a break periodically, shaking your hands out, you know, walking away from it and then coming back. Use common sense. If you're going to get into air tools at all, whether it's sanders or whether it's using spray guns, I would suggest that you befriend a auto body shop guy or person. They have a wealth of experience. Today's auto body technicians have a lot of technical knowledge and have a lot of good advice. I actually had a guy that used to work part-time in the shop while he was in between work, and he taught us all how to use air tools. He taught us all how to spray finishes, and how we should apply the finishes, and how to do wet on wet finish application. So it was invaluable, and most of us got to the point where we were at least reasonably skilled at using air tools, but it is a different thing. So it requires different maintenance. It's different kinds of approaches to things. But these tools are robust. If you have a good compressor, they'll do far more work than an electric, a plug-in tool, and they'll last a lot longer. So get involved with your local auto body shop. Get involved with the local auto body shop supply place. They'll give you good deals on sandpaper and teach you how to use those expensive HVLP spray guns. So that's it for today, and we'll talk to you later.